Hello and welcome to this first painting tutorial from Mammoth Factory Games, where I will show the painting method for this model of Loriantha from April's Sprawl release. I hope to show you a method that's quite accessible to everyone. There are no fancy techniques involved and should be quite easy for most people to get a similar looking effect. This effect took around 90 minutes to do, so it's not a multi-day, multi-week project, which hopefully should give you a bit more time to sit down and play the module that goes along with it. So after printing and assembling the model, I undercoated it black. You can see that this is a very organic, very natural model with lots of fur, lots of leaves and horns that should be perfect for highlighting the technique that I'm going to show you today. Now start off by using what some of you will know as a Zenithal highlight. Now this involves just spraying a light colour, in this case white, from the top of the model to mimic how the sun would naturally shine and naturally create shadows. Now here I'm using a spray brush. Of course this could be done quite easily using a standard spray can, and you can see immediately that the shadows are really nicely picked out. Now we start off with quite an intense spray from the top of the model focused around the head. That'll create the main focal point of the model, and then after that we just put a little light spray around the rest of it, just to show that light coming from the surrounding areas as well. You should be able to see how effective that technique is at very quickly creating shadows where you need them to be on the model. So once we've got the Zenithal highlight applied, we're going to use these contrast paints by Citadel Colour. Now these paints require a good shake before you're using them, not to redisperse the pigment, but because they rely on a very specific surface tension when they're being used, and without the shake you see some inconsistencies in the coverage, and you find the paint starts to pool and doesn't apply and doesn't cover the surface as you'd like it to. So some of you may have seen these before. They're sort of almost ink type material rather than traditional paint, so slightly see-through, and you should be able to see this as I apply this onto the model here. So I'll just speed this up so that you don't have to watch the entire process, but you can still get an idea of how these paints apply. Now you can see as this is building up that the transparency of the paint picks out the shadows that we created during the Zenithal highlight. This makes it a very easy way to highlight it, and it also means that if you need to make some of the areas of the model darker, such as underneath this hoof here, you can just apply another coat, and this increases the slight shadowing. So on this area of the model we're using a contrast paint called Grunter Fur. It's a very nice warm brown that creates a natural feel, almost the same colour as a tree for this tree spirit, and for the other part of the model we're going to use Guilliman's Flesh. Apologies, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that one properly. I think it is a meme online that no one else does either. So here you can see when it goes on, it's a very similar brown, maybe slightly lighter, but we're going to create a bit more of a contrast with this as we go through the model. As you can see, there's very little difference between the two browns here, but it's already starting to look a bit like a tree spirit, and you can see how easy it is to get these shadows in place. So the next step, to contrast with these browns, we're going to use Dark Angel's green, just to give that really nice deep leaf colour into his mane. And next up, for the hooves, we're going to use the skeleton horde. This is my go-to for anything bone or anything that needs their light brown. So we have our base contrast paints on. Next we're going to use a very easy technique called dry brushing. It takes a little bit of practice to get the right amount of paint on the brush that you require, but once you've got that sorted, it's very easy. So first of all, you dab a small amount of paint onto the brush, and then lightly brush that off on your hand or on a piece of towel. Do this a couple of times so that you have a good coverage on the brush, and then all you do is just lightly feather this over the originally painted surface. Now what you're trying to do here is just pick out the raised area of the model. So you keep adding paint onto the brush, brushing off the excess and just lightly patching it on. Almost like you see archaeologists trying to dust away the sand or the soil off a very fragile bone. Just keep applying just small amounts, lightly brushing. It's best to use an old brush for this because it can get a bit damaging for brushes. It does tend to split the bristles somewhat, so if you've got any old brushes lying around, it's best to use those. So to go over the green, we've used a medium olive from Vallejo, and we're going to use a brown sand using the same technique to go over the horns and to go over the tail. Using a slightly bigger brush here, just because it's a slightly bigger area that we're working with, and it's the same technique, just lightly brushing on, picking out the raised areas. Now if you find, as I have done with this model, despite the dry brushing, the areas you've gone over are still looking slightly flat, you can quite easily use the same contrast paint that we used before and just work that into the recesses of the model as I'm doing here. So just working it into the recesses, and you can see immediately that it starts to give a bit more of a contrast, a bit more of a colour gradient, which is what we're looking for here. This is a very easy technique, mixing the contrast paints and dry brushing, but it works particularly well on a very organic model such as this. Lots of raised areas, not so much regularity in the model, lots of recesses that you can work the contrast paint into, lots of raised areas that you can pick out with the dry brushing. I wouldn't recommend this technique on something like power armour or plate armour, anything artificial where there's very regular lines and very flat areas. This technique doesn't seem to work so well, but on anything like fur, or as we see here, leaves and the tail and the horns, it really is a very quick technique to get quite a nice looking effect. So next up we're going to use the Citadel paint Dawnstone just for the rock underneath the model. Slight bit of difficulty getting this one out of the dropper bottle. Of course the Citadel paint's not designed for the dropper bottles, but I, like so many other painters, find them a lot easier. Just mix with a slight amount of water here and just paint on as you would a normal layer paint. So once all this has got a nice coverage over it, we're going to take white grey from Vallejo and just use the same dry brush technique. We can afford to be slightly thicker with this dry brushing, a little bit more paint left on the brush to give a bit more of a marbled effect onto the stone. So finally, for the leaf and grass on the bottom of the base, we're going to use the same Dark Angel's green basing and then the medium olive to dry brush over the top. That'll just help tie in the model with the base to make it appear a little bit more like the tree spirit is coming directly from the ground and is made from the forest it's coming from. So again, you can see it's a nice effect there, very easy, very quick, just creates a nice realistic graph. And then finally, we're just going to put a bit of black coat around the rim of the base. So once this black is done, you can leave the model as it is to make a very nice centerpiece on your D&D battlefield or perhaps an ally. But I'm just going to add a small amount of red just onto the eye. If you're not comfortable painting eyes, which I know a lot of people aren't, perfectly fine to leave this model as he is. He is a tree spirit, so perhaps wouldn't have the same distinct features as us mere mortals. So once the painting is done, we move on to the basing that I find really brings the model alive. Now the most important thing when we're looking at basing is the glue that we're using. Highly recommend looking out for a matte PVA glue. And when it comes to basing, I find that the materials you use are almost the key to making the model look good. You can search around your local model railway store, but I found an excellent set to use for this kind of work, particularly forest work, from Honor Guard Miniatures on Etsy. It sells a kit with everything that you need, including these quite nice looking strings of leaves that I'm just gluing here onto the model with the matte PVA. Of course, this PVA glue looks white when you start to apply it, but like most glues will eventually dry clear, and that's why you're looking for that matte PVA glue so that you don't get the shine off the surface. Now for these leaves, I'm just taking some of the material that came in the kit and just pulling some of it apart, using two different colours of green here just to give a little bit of variety. I think anyone who's been walking, especially around the English countryside, you'll notice just how much variety there is in the colours and the different types of green and the different types of leaves that you see in the woods. So I'm just draping these over the model. Don't need to be too accurate. This kind of organic model, this kind of natural living model, a little bit of randomness is good, so just stretch it over the model until you find a layout that you're pleased with, and then just slowly, carefully dab in bits of the glue to hold it in place. So you can see this is a very quick technique and instantly brings the model alive, just adds a little bit of extra realism. Now we're left with a lot of leftover dusty leaves from where we pulled apart the vines, and we can just apply this onto the base of the model using a little bit of glue, much like you would have done with glitter when you were in kindergarten or nursery school. So just sprinkle over the top of glue and then tap off the excess. Next, we're going to use some of the bushes that were also part of the Honor Guard kit, and just glue a small piece of this to the back of the model, just to help bring a bit more texture, a bit more body into the model, and have a bit of a background for the wonderful sculpt that has been made by Mammoth Factory Games. And once this is in place, it's looking like a lot of greens and a lot of browns, so just to add a little bit more variance in the colour, we're going to use this red berried material and just place a little at the front of the model, just to break up those greens and the browns and add a slight variance. Again, no need to worry about the colour of the glue as it goes on, this will dry transparent. And then finally, just an extra last piece of the red berries, just at the front of the model again. Just a small amount of glue, and then use the brush just to push this small bit of foliage into place. So there we have it, model finished in around an hour and a half, maybe 5 or 10 minutes over, but it uses quite quick, simple techniques that anyone can pick up, and all they do is just bring out the excellence, the quality of the sculpt from Mammoth Factory Games. If you have any comments or any questions or perhaps advice for me and how I can improve as well, please feel free to leave them below, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next one.